I was not the only patent case at that time that my congressional office was dealing with. He's dealt with them before. He has never seen them claim that under policy they don't talk to Congress. Like that's not something that happens. Uh, so yeah, something touchy is being touched upon. Um, Ultimately, my attorneys filed the appeal. I think the appeal looks pretty good. Basically, they're in violation of constitutional norms, the laws of the land, their own procedures, and the people with whom I am allowed to communicate uh, all claim that they believe that I should get what I'm working on, that I've jumped through all the hoops that exist. So, that's what's on my side of the claim, basically. And what's on their side of the claim is something that nobody can substantiate or agree with. So we'll see.
Welcome to Beyond the Fail, the podcast where we talk to leaders and entrepreneurs about their biggest business failures. We'll deep dive into how they overcame these setbacks, the lessons they learned from them, all to help you gain valuable insights. Failure is an essential part of the business journey, as well as being the key to success. So we're here to show you how to thrive from it. So thanks so much for being here today. So take us back. Where did it all start for you in your career and business?
Well, it started out of college. Got a job at a .com startup and started learning computational mathematics in earnest. I had some computer programming in high school and in college, and never been heavily attracted to it. But the language that the company I was working for used was called Perl, which, in addition to being a systems language, which was a lot more interesting than the kinds of problems I was generally exposed to uh, in school, also has a fairly advanced regular expression engine. And regular expressions, you can think of them as the sort of arithmetic of strings. So just as you can use arithmetic to manipulate numbers to form functions and arrange things, you can use regular expressions on words and characters in the same way.
Okay. So what was that like working for a .com startup? Like, was that around sort of early 2000s?
Yeah, 2000. It lasted for 11 months, 12 months, something like that. And then they'd overspent their funding and had to lay nearly everybody off. So I went and worked for another .com startup, which was very similar in its tenure, a year, then a layoff.
Right. So what happened to that second company?
They ultimately got bought. So they developed a business flow software that was available online for people that manage scientific publications. They had a captive audience of completely non-technical people that gave them a lot of money, which allowed them to make a lot of very bad decisions about how they were going to build their software. Um, and I believe Thomson Reuters bought them, canned basically everything they actually did, and used the building to house what I've heard is their tertiary backups. Um,
Right.
so if all of Thomson Reuters computers go down and the primary backup system doesn't work, then they can go to Charlottesville, and there's a bunch of computers with the information in cold storage there.
So how did it feel to be, joining two startups and then, so soon after kind of college, and then both sort of end in kind of redundancy and, you know, disappointment, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I was somewhat more focused on learning about the new kinds of programming and mathematics at that time. So um, The failures of the companies were not something that I was seeing myself as responsible for or engaged with, really, because I was very junior. Although, by odd coincidence, for Boxer Gym, the first of those companies, I had been working on a project around analyzing their customer behavior, and uh, in the weeks leading up to the layoffs, uh, I actually discovered that their customer behavior was pretty much diametrically opposed to their planned revenue um, uh, mechanism. They had two forms of revenue. They had an ad-based stream, and then they had this other prize-based stream where they wanted their users to engage with a system that would wind up giving them kickbacks. And it turned out that their user bases, when exposed to that, just left the site and never returned. They had absolutely zero interest in that end of things. They did have a dedicated cadre of people that were interested in playing, and so if they'd leaned into ad revenue, then and moderated the amount of content they were producing, because it turned out that their core user base didn't care about the content. They were social gamers that were there for their ability to interact with other players. Um, then they could have continued going. I don't know if they could have done well or poorly, uh, but uh, but yeah, I had discovered that just prior. I then had some health issues. I have incredibly bad knees, and as it turned out, uh, a long-term problem had turned into a locked knee, so I had to get knee surgery. Um, so actually, I was laid off. They sent me home with a computer so I would be able to work during my recovery from home. Um, uh, I had the surgery, off that day. The following Monday, I get set up and I'm getting set up to log in, and it's not working very well. I get a knock on the door from my friend who was the CTO, and he's here to collect the computer
Wow.
because they're laying everybody off. So they really had no idea what was
Wow.
going on there.
Wow. And obviously, this being a business failure podcast, that is a really interesting kind of story. Like, what was their biggest mistakes, you think? Like, was there?
Their biggest mistake was overspending on content. Um, this might not have been a mistake for the people making the decision, um, but it was definitely a mistake for the business. So, Boxer Jam was the combination of two companies, Boxer Productions and Jam Enterprises, I think were what they were called. Jam is Merv Griffin's ex-wife and her sister. Um, they came up with game shows. Merv Griffin's ex-wife actually has decent credit for inventing Jeopardy. Um, there's a fun little story. I have no idea how true it is, but she hooked up with a couple of guys who wanted to get into uh, like production, like entertainment production, and felt that the internet was going to be a low cost mechanism to spread out that space. And they came up with the idea. She had this huge group of game show pitch ideas, and of course, Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, and there's only a certain number of hours in the day on network television. There's a few pretty major game shows that sort of use it all up. So they were kind of sitting on the shelf. They were like, well, why don't we, hook this all up, put them out online, and get people to be able to play game shows in their own living room. They were like, okay, let's go with that. So they did that. They put together a user base in the like 50K-ish region, and they got tens, I think around $20 million, 10, $20 million in funding. And we're like, okay, well, we've only got a few versions of each game, like Jeopardy. You've got the questions, and then you need another set of questions for tomorrow,
Mm,
right? So they had, I don't know, a dozen-ish, and they were like, well, we should have like 100-ish of each of these things. So they spent a lot of money developing all that content? Well, as it happens, they had three different kinds of users. They had people that showed up, looked at the site, and decided it wasn't for them and left. They had people that showed up, played the games 3 or 4 times. That was it. And they had people that showed up and played and played and played and played and played. And those people would play through the entire game cycle and do it again and again and again and again, and had no drop off across multiple games. So they spent all their money building content for people that would never, nobody who saw it would care that it existed. And at the same time, they invested in this prize plan to I guess, uh, you might remember back in the day with Wheel of Fortune, they used to have people actually spend their prize and buy stuff, and that was a like promotional advertisement
Mm.
opportunity, where the company could actually, like, you want people to hear, this golden voice describe your couch. That it was like paid advertisement, so they were trying to do something like that. At that point in 2000, that was of the past. That was something that even Wheel of Fortune had gone away from more than a decade before. People were offended, objected. They just didn't like it. They were there to play and be online. They didn't really care about the other stuff. So uh, if they'd focused on player growth, player engagement, uh, uh, game breadth rather than game depth, and not spent money on the things that they spent money on, but instead spent money on the stuff that was growing and had revenue, then they might have been able to get somewhere, but they didn't. And a big piece of that is that they didn't know. Although, going back to who's making the decision and who it's for, spending money on content means moving money from the Boxer Jam coffers into like the Jam coffers. So they're employed by themselves to make that stuff. So they may well have done very well out of making that decision to tank the business.
Right. So yeah, it was essentially, as you said, not under. From what I understood, you said as well, is like it's not understanding their customers and essentially creating content for the wrong customer base, and they didn't make content for the customer base that was actually spending money.
Yeah, yeah, or at least generating
Mm.
revenue. The modern web, we've sort of learned that, in many cases, people won't give you money, but they will sort of have advertising
Yeah.
around, and a lot of businesses are based on that model. 2000 was sort of before that happened. Google didn't have
Mm.
ads back then, for example. Um, there were a few ad-based things out there, but they were clunky, and there were definitely a lot of arguments. It wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is today, but it was large enough that that's where their revenue model came from, and social gaming had not yet come into existence, and so they didn't know where they were, and they used a model from a world that was 25 or 30 years old,
Mm.
and it turned out not to map very well to where they actually were.
Because it's interesting because I think from my understanding of some of those sort of business models and products from those the early sort of dot-com businesses, in some ways they were a little bit ahead of their time or before their time, because gaming's massive now, right? It's a huge industry, online gaming, and some of this stuff was probably too early, or they didn't understand the revenue system, or there wasn't an obvious monetization system to be able to make them sustainable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, they had like $20 million, which they spent in about a year, 10xing their content. Um, if they had operated for 10 years and organically grown at the rate that they'd been organically growing for the previous couple of years, then by 2010, they easily could have, been rivaling Facebook and things like, what was that farm game that Facebook had that
Yeah.
basically was like the only reason people were on it.
Mm.
They could have been in that kind of a
Mm.
zone. Quite easily. Now, convincing the people to just stroke you a check for $20 million that you're gonna, relax your way to greatness is a hell of a lift. But it 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 may well have worked out a lot better for them than just juicing it into their own bank accounts, which is more or less what they did.
And do you think that, having had inside sort of insights from that .com era and the massive implosion of that most of that industry in the early 2000s, what do you see as the reason that so many companies went bust and the kind of the whole market kind of collapsed?
Well, that actually gets into like what got me starting thinking about the math of my current project. Um, I've seen a large number of companies either blow themselves up or make make incredibly costly mistakes, on the order of billions of dollars. That where you know they did okay anyway in some cases. Like I said, my second company got bought up after years of sort of floundering around and never really producing a particularly good product, but they had customer relationships that were effectively locked in, and so they were fine. But going back, I've seen a lot of companies where the people who are in charge of making decisions made decisions that weren't just bad. Everybody makes mistakes. That there were files in the company. If they had known to look and understood how to read files on computers that they owned and controlled, they would understand that this decision was completely unsupportable. Now, they might have made it anyway. Humans again make mistakes, do things for all sorts of reasons, but um, this isn't somebody is driving down a street and then runs over a child that suddenly ran out in front of the road. This is there's a stop sign and there's a passenger pointing at the kid and shouting, and they ran over the kid anyway. Like the information was there, but there's a lot of information, you can't be aware of all of it. So people kind of default back to their standard kinds of approaches, and the approach that I've seen most often is that the leaders build a team around themselves of the sorts of people that they like to work with, and those people make decisions among themselves based on their sort of experience of being leaders making those sorts of decisions. And sadly, because most of the information and most of the ideas are in the files, um, most of the information and most of the ideas aren't resident in leadership. And so, just like if you're tuning your radio and if you're not actually looking out the window, you're gonna have an accident eventually. That's what's going on. They're not looking at reality anymore, and so they're defaulting back to the things that got them to where they are, and that's not kind of relevant anymore. If you're in a completely different place doing a completely different thing, your experiences could be harming you.
Mm. But why is there such a disconnect between those leaders and essentially uh, the key data and the key metrics that they need to make decisions?
I think the primary reason is just volume. The amount of information that is generated by modern uh, companies is at an order that's so far beyond anything that's previously existed that um, the the sorts of decision making. So I don't know if you've ever seen the film or read the book A Bridge Too Far, but one of the most sort of famous failures of World War II is the Allies push. Normandy's happened. We're in France, but we want the war to be over quick. And Patton and the British guy, whose name is currently escaping me, which is unfortunate because he's the entire driver of the story. Um, Monty. Uh,
Chamberlain.
Monty and Patton are
No.
no.
Oh no. Yeah, I
The
know.
general.
Right. I don't
Yeah.
know the
So
generals.
the two of them are, like backbiting and
Mm.
stuff. And Ike it's a huge headache for Ike and Churchill and FDR because they're both prima donnas and they both want to be the person that takes Berlin. So Monty comes up with this plan to have the biggest operation in human history. Like Normandy's going to be a footnote, and he's going to put 3 airborne divisions out and seize 3 cities deep in German territory, and then run an entire armored corps straight into the heart of the Ruhr in a day. And the entire plan is going to be executed over the course of a week. Uh, and it sort of falls apart almost instantly. The film is great. It's something that anybody in project management or business leadership should watch because literally nothing they do is right. There's a whole sequence of red flags every step of the way. Um, but that's also, it's bizarre that this sort of great military disaster of the Second World War resembles experiences I had in companies that had 4 or 5 dozen, employees. How could you be that myopic, that closed off? Well, it's because computers generate, massive amounts of information. And so even when you're not engaged in a continental scale operation with tens or hundreds of thousands of people doing all sorts of unbelievable stuff, um, it builds up to that level very, very quickly. Your web servers are being hit by people from all over the planet, and that's, most people aren't Eisenhower, and Eisenhower still approved, this plan that really didn't work out very well and wound up pretty much decimating the SAS. Um, the the final town, I think, was Nijmegen, and they sent the Brits in, and they just got cut to pieces because we couldn't get there in time. They were supposed to hold it for like, a day and a half, and like a week later,
Wow.
the Allies were not really there, and the Germans had reinforced, and like 10,000 men went in, and 2,000 men came
Wow.
out.
Crazy. Bernard Montgomery is his name.
Yeah.
Monty. I just looked it up. No, that's it's a great parallel you've made. Because there is a lot of crossover, I say, between military military approaches and business as well, and business leadership. So, what was the first business that you ran or started?
Well, this one, I'm sorry to say, yeah, I'm not really an ideal entrepreneur. And you should not do things the way I'm doing them. But I fell into this pretty much because of my discovery. So I'd mentioned earlier, I was very interested in computational mathematics. I've carried that interest with me through the last quarter century. And so I try to stay up on the developments that are being made, and I recreationally play with these ideas and develop some new things. I've over the course of my that quarter century, I've built a programming language or designed a programming language that is based on set valued variables and created a templating system that actually has some fairly advanced features. It allows for multiple orderings without any internal statements, and it allows for templates that are valid documents of the type for which they are templating. Something that I'm pretty sure that one nobody's ever done before. I created a partial time ordering gossip protocol, sort of mini blockchain for a friend at one point, uh, and uh, done a few different things with state machines, and then I came up with this algorithm. Actually, I came up with an approach for developing algorithms, and then I used that approach to create this algorithm for price discovery in financial markets.
You said you're not an ideal entrepreneur. What did you mean by that?
Well, I've been through a handful of entrepreneur training classes, and I was actually just having a conversation with a sort of kid fresh out of college who wants to get into entrepreneurship. And uh, the driving force in entrepreneurship is sales. Like I was saying, the disconnect between where your money's coming from and what you're doing is what causes the businesses I've seen fail. And so when you train as an entrepreneur, if you want to be an entrepreneur, the advice that's out there uh, is is you go out and sell first. Um, and of course, you don't have a product, so what you actually do is uh, do exploration to find out what product to sell. So um, you go out and have interviews with the sorts of people that you think you might be able to help or might be able to sell to, and find out what kinds of problems they have, and you do that until you find a problem cluster that's broad enough to pay for the kind of life that you have, that where you believe you can produce a product that solves that problem space. And you just do that, and then get your product and go sell it to the people that said that they already wanted to buy it. And that's what you know business schools and stuff like that will train you. Is how you become an entrepreneur.
But that's not what you've done.
No. I solved a foundational problem in economics that nobody even knew existed. Even I didn't know it existed until after I'd solved it. And then after load testing it, I discovered it was a few 100,000 times better than the way we actually run the economy. And uh, so now I already have the solution to a problem that many people are unaware exists, or uh, when they are aware that it exists, they are unaware of how to localize it. And so I need to explain to people that a sort of large cluster of problems is in fact related to this fundamental part of human life on Earth for the last, say, 500 years, and that needs to change.
Okay, we'll circle back to that. But one sort of question I was intrigued by: did you ever want to be an entrepreneur when you were young?
No. Rather oddly, when I was young, I didn't really want much of anything. I have a fundamentally contented personality, which is another big disadvantage in life. I mean, it's fantastic to have one, but like the drive of, like Michael Jordan, I think is a famous example of somebody with enormous achievement who sort of has these long list of bitter personal resentments, and sort of like every single thing that he has is in fact just sort of another reason to hate or something. At least that seems to be what the general public perception is at this point. Uh, I I've had a few serious disagreements, anger, and some of that's led to some decent successes. But for the most part, uh, even in my fairly extremely put upon circumstances today, where I am effectively being victimized by the federal government, I fall asleep, sleep well, wake up in the morning, go out and do my stuff. Like I have, I, I am sort of personality baseline of contentment.
So do you put the your lack of motivation to become an entrepreneur down to that personality, that you being content, or is there more to it than that as well?
I really don't know. I'm aware that there is some literature on uh, personality traits and other traits of entrepreneurs. I'm not deeply familiar with it, but from what little I am aware of, it seems to be very scattered. Um, but the phrase "necessity is the mother of invention." Uh, uh, that's one of Ben Franklin's. So I think contentment is not your friend in the case of innovation. Uh, I I'm aware of this issue. And something you'd said earlier, we learn as much from success as failure. I think in the pre-call you
Hmm.
said that. I'm pretty sure humans have a pretty solid understanding that we basically learn from failure and we do not learn from success. And so something that I have built a habit around is re-critiquing my successes in an attempt to learn from them. If I play a game and I win, I replay that game to figure out like what I did wrong so that I can still learn and still get better at it. If I cook a meal and it comes out decently, I replay that in my mind and think about what I did wrong or what what with the benefits of hindsight could have been done differently to try to do things better. And when I write a computer program or solve a math problem, um, if I get it to work, because that's the big challenge with those things is actually solving it in the first place. I go back, and there's a famous 20th century mathematician, Paul Erdős. Um, he had this thing about what he called the book proof. So proving that something like that at professional mathematician level, that's the entire thing, is proving something's true. But Erdős said that's fine. I mean, you have to do that. But then the challenge is discovering the proof that you write in the textbook for like 8-year olds or 12-year olds or 24-year
Hmm.
olds for most of his stuff, that actually explains to them that this is true. And one of my favorite examples of this, the Pythagorean theorem. Euclid has his proof of the Pythagorean theorem, which is reasonably followable, but is relatively complicated and not the kind of thing that you would necessarily want to explain to a child.
What do your parents do?
They are currently retired.
What were
Um,
their main career jobs?
yeah, during my childhood, my father was a carpenter and contractor. And then, as the body wears, he shifted over into sales and project management in like tile, flooring, that kind of thing. My mother was a waitress and then went to college and became a nurse.
Right. What did you learn from them?
Well, my dad accidentally taught me algebra as a 6-year old. Um,
That was the beginning of your maths journey, was it?
Actually, my math journey had started before that. It turned out that I was the fastest counter in kindergarten, for example. But But yeah, having as it turned out algebra in my back pocket made grade school math really a breeze. Um, um, they're both much harder workers than I am. I've always been a little on the lazy side, uh, but you know, cooking um, and reasoning, I guess, is another sort of basic life skills.
Have they been your biggest influence on your life?
Uh, Pretty easily. Uh,
Have you had other mentors along the way, or
I've had a few others here and there, but not very many. I'm not terribly social, so at that first job, I was actually assigned a mentor, and when everyone was laid off, we actually both got a job at that same second company. At that second company, we discovered we were next door neighbors. Um, Not side side. Our backyards backed onto one
right?
another, but I was working with a guy. We have become pretty good friends, and in fact, he asked me the question that prompted me to turn my algorithmic approach to the problem of creating marketplaces.
So circling back to your to the business that you know, in your words, you fell into, and obviously, you know, you talked about solving this problem. I suppose there's a sort of simple explanation. What does that business, or has that business been currently doing? You know, for sort of monetization.
Well, there are four projects around the world that are attempting to set up markets that incorporate the technology. Um, One of them is early days. It's only been about a month since they've gotten themselves rolling. They do actually want to sign some papers, although we haven't negotiated what those papers will entail. One of them actually also wanted to sign some papers and came up with a very generous system should he actually manage to get off the ground. I'll be getting some nice revenue out of that. Um, Two of them are simply operating under the open source aegis, and and uh, you know, if and when they get off the ground, there's likely to be some consulting opportunities for me. But as it stands now, they're just operating, and in fact, for all of them, they are basically operating independently.
Mm.
So um, I'm searching. I've got a few people who are have sort of a finger on looking around for opportunities to build out just on their own hook. So those could turn into businesses for themselves or not. We'll see. Uh, and and mostly I'm just sort of wandering around. Recently, I've started trying to reach out along the sort of Horn of Africa. There's a major disruption in the global chocolate supply, and the chocolate market is not handling it very well because markets can't actually handle anything anymore, and so there might be some appetite for building markets that can work in that space.
What's the sort of as you sort of said earlier, the explanation if you know, if you're explaining your the unique product that you've created or the solution, if you're going to explain that to a child, how would you explain it?
So a deal involves the convergence of three things. Um, we think of deals as a buyer and a seller coming together and making a deal. And the buyer is bringing currency to the deal. The seller is bringing, you know, the object to the deal. But what's missing, and what with modern understanding is quite clear, the buyer and the seller are each bringing information to the deal. They have their ideas, they have their desires. And so what a deal actually is information currency, and object coming together in confluence, all of them in agreement with each other. And so what I did was take the standard two-sided market of buyers and sellers, which is evolved into this complex chain of internal traders and insiders with sort of buyers and sellers hanging around the fringes, into a marketplace that has a negotiation space where information is integrated into deals, which can then be group oper- optioned by people with the goods and people with the currency. And by splitting that two thing with information impounded in various ways into a three-way thing where information is its own separate piece, it's possible to make it vastly more profitable to provide good information to the marketplace, vastly less profitable to provide bad information to the marketplace, and vastly less costly to use that market information for those people that have been shoved to the edge of the existing market.
Right. And you said something fascinating earlier, which was um, you had been felt that you'd been victimized by the federal government. Tell us about that.
Well, sadly, yes. So I have a crazy and probably unique patent story, and not just unique in the sense that you know everyone's life is their own, but unique in the sense that uh, the government's never done anything like this to anybody before. So uh, I began the patenting process in 2015. I filed a provisional patent so that I could talk to people, so I could find an attorney. Uh, Finding an attorney was a major struggle because I wanted people with expertise in the financial space, and a lot of those people have conflicts where they have other clients that my system would have conflicting operation with. My system effectively changes how finance works, and so it potentially conflicts with nearly everybody in the finance space. Um, I finally found somebody. We got a patent put together. Um, I had to fight with them a little bit during that process, but the way they put it together, they said we sort of claim too much. They will they'll sort of knock us back for sort of claiming the entire universe, and we'll just sort of figure out where they knock us back to, and then we'll draw a line around the thing that they've knocked us back to, and everything will be copacetic. Like, that's how you do it. It's like, okay, you're the boss, you're the expert. Well, I'm the boss, but you're the expert. We're going to go with your advice. So we do that. They knock us back, and they had also put a handful of equations in the patent. And I had specified to them that these equations were examples. They weren't the core of the patent. There was a sort of deeper thing going on. What they knocked us back to was the equations. And they were like, this is great. We can grab the equations. It's all good. And I was like, remember, I told you the equations aren't good enough. We need to be broader than that. So that was a bit of a struggle to get through my attorneys. They really didn't want to do that. It was a bigger struggle with the patent office. So far, so normal. Lots of people have been through this kind of phase. 2019, September 2019, I get a notice acceptance. Now, patent process, you deal with an examiner. They have some expertise in the area that you're operating in. You convince them that you've come up with something that's completely new, that works better than what's out there. And they say, yep, I've looked at this. That's what it does. Here's a notice of acceptance. You take that acceptance to the patent office, and then they hand you the patent. That's the normal procedure. Um, so, notice of acceptance, good deal. I'm on cloud nine. My examiner's supervisor calls my attorneys, and she tells him that she sort of heard it through the grapevine that they're probably going to ignore the notice of
And
acceptance.
what does
So he gets back
ignoring
to
mean?
me.
How can they ignore it?
Well, they're just not going to do it. Um, like if you if you need to get a driver's license, you go to the DMV, you go through all the procedures, they take your picture, and then you have to sit there while they go back and sort of make the card. If they just don't make the card,
Right.
and you go up and you're like, "Hey, what happened?" And you're like, "Who are you?"
Mm.
Um, like that they're just going to not follow their own procedures. And when a government's decided to not follow its own procedures, it's not good. That's you're in a bad place at that point. Um, so I asked him, I was like, "What's going on with that?" It's like, "Well, you know, I don't really know because this doesn't really happen. Um, but let's sort of keep our powder dry. There are a few weird things happening out in patent space. Maybe some, elephants are shuffling. We'll keep our heads down. Um, we have to apply for this patent by December because if you get an acceptance and you don't apply for the patent, it just goes public. So you've got like a 3 month window. So we'll sort of hang back, see if we hear anything, follow up here and there, but then in December we'll apply for this thing and see what happens. So nothing really happens, don't really hear anything. I read up on a few patent cases that are out and might be affecting stuff. December rolls around, we apply for the patent, we don't hear about anything. Christmas, New Year's, get back to them in January. It's like, hey, here's the acceptance, here's the application, what's up? They get back to us like a month later and say, yeah, we're not going to do it. We haven't figured out why yet. We'll get back to you in a couple months and let you know what's going on. Okay, not much you can do with that. They're in charge. They're not doing it for reasons that they don't understand. Okay. So they come back and they're like, yep, we're not doing it. And here are the reasons why. And they've got about half a dozen reasons. My lawyers take a look at that and they, write me up a thing and they say, okay, like 5 of these, no big deal. It's all lawyer stuff. We gotta use this phrase instead of that phrase that
Mm.
you don't care about, but it doesn't change the meaning of the phrase. It's just lawyer stuff. We move some of the boilerplate around. It's all fine. This one's a killer. They say that this thing is useless, and you're not allowed to patent things that are useless. Well, the entire point of the patent is that it's unbelievably valuable. That it reduces the information load by hundreds of thousands. That as a result of doing that, the going back to what we were talking about earlier with companies that fail because of information overload, because of that, people can make decisions that are in their own interests because there's amounts of information that they can actually physiologically process to make decisions around. And what this does is it shrinks down the entire system enough so that that's actually true. um, and and the scale, like hundreds of thousands, is an enormous scale. It's the difference between being last in line at Wembley Stadium behind literally everybody else and going to use your bathroom, in your house. Like that's 100,000. So it's crazy basically that you'd say that 100,000x is meaningless. I I have to explain to my attorneys the mathematics of how that works. And it takes us a little while for me to get them to sort of understand just how big this thing is and how obvious it is. But they eventually put together a very sharply worded brief that, paraphrasing, says, hey, if you want to defend 1 = 2 in court, we'll be happy to eviscerate you. But otherwise, let's not be silly. You can't possibly mean these things. Um, so February 2021, they gave me a second notice of acceptance. Uh, we apply immediately for the patent. My lawyers are like, "This is great. Let's see what happens." Like, what happened last time. There's a withdrawal procedure that you can actually undergo. They didn't undergo it. So we're like, let's just get this done. You know, get it under. 3 weeks later, they withdraw the second notice of acceptance. And double acceptance withdrawal is incredibly rare. And of course, I'm not experiencing double acceptance withdrawal. I'm experiencing a ignoring procedure followed by a withdrawal. And that's that. No attorney I've ever spoken to has ever heard of that happening to anybody. Um, so the procedure, they actually have to tell you what's going on. So they write up and they say, okay, we're not going to give you this patent because if this patent were granted, you would control all economic activity in the United States and its territories. Um,
Is that true?
no, it isn't true. And they acknowledged that the examiner and the supervisor. So my attorney had a meeting with my examiner and the supervisor, and they said, "Look, we understand that this is complete BS. However, we're under orders from people, and we're not allowed to talk to you about the people that we're under orders from. Um, and we don't agree with those people, and we can't really say for sure even what they were saying because what they were saying was just such nonsense. So what this is our best interpretation of our understanding of the thing that they're saying. Um, and because this is out of our hands, even though we disagree with this, because this doesn't give you control of the entire economy. So another thing that they agreed to is that there's zero prior art. So one of the things about patents is you're not allowed to patent something that's already known. You couldn't patent the Gutenberg printing press. Gutenberg printing presses
Mm.
exist. You could patent an improvement to printing presses. Um, and if you patented an improvement to printing presses that was so good that no human being would use any printer technology that presently exists or has ever previously existed because your system was better, cheaper, faster, more accurate, simultaneously, then good. You'd have the patent on that. Um, so that, awesome that you invented something that is that good. That's not a valid reason to invalidate that patent. Um,
So what I'm hearing is there's political motivations behind this decision.
that seems incredibly likely, yes. But we'll so stage two of the story. So we're there. I'm talking to my attorneys. What can we do next? And they say, well, we can't go back. There's a procedure for appealing this to these guys, but they say the decision's out of their hands. So we need to appeal to the patent board. Let's start putting that together. Meanwhile, I opened up a case with my congressional office when a U.S. citizen's getting messed about by the bureaucracy. That's why your congressperson exists, basically. So I go ask them, hey, can you find out, freedom of information or whatever? Can you find out what's going on, just to give me some kind of clue what I'm into here? So I get the chief of staff of the congressional office. This guy's got decades of experience. He says, sure, here's what we can do. We'll write a letter. In 4 to 6 weeks, we will get a full report. It won't just be a form letter. It'll be a full report of what's going on. We can't necessarily change their mind. In fact, we can't change their mind at all. We can't necessarily change anything, but it will shake the tree. And if what's going on is something that, tree shaking affects, then that'll happen. But at least we can tell you what's going on. It's like, great, terrific. They got stonewalled. It took closer to 2 months than 1 month. It was the longest delay he'd ever seen in his experience. It was just a form letter. It just detailed the timeline that I gave to you, except it left out the first notice of acceptance in September of 2019. So it was false in addition to everything else. Um, and it also included a sort of a little postscript, a note at the bottom to the congressional office saying that patent office policy is that they only communicate through a single channel. And because I have an attorney, that's the channel. And so they would never communicate with the congressional office on this matter ever again. I was not the only patent case at that time that my congressional office was dealing with. He's dealt with them before. he has never seen them claim that under policy they don't talk to Congress. Like that's not something that happens. Uh, so yeah, something touchy is being touched upon. Um, Ultimately, my attorneys filed the appeal. I think the appeal looks pretty good. Basically, they're in violation of constitutional norms, the laws of the land, their own procedures, and the people with whom I am allowed to communicate uh, all claim that they believe that I should get what I'm working on, that I've jumped through all the hoops that exist. So, that's what's on my side of the claim, basically, and what's on their side of the claim is something that nobody can substantiate or agree with. So we'll see.
So what do you think's really going on? What do you think's like actually, some of the, because obviously there's some agenda going on. There's someone, someone's feeling threatened by this disruption. So what's really going on?
There is threat in this disruption. So one of the precedents that I'm relying on for my appeal, for example, is a case from 2019. I believe in uh, winter, like January, February 2019, where a woman who works for the CME Group, which is the premier commodity exchange on earth. The LME has nearly as many benchmarks there, but the CME Group has most of the world's benchmarks under their aegis. And they produce the software that virtually everybody uses to run their own local marketplaces. They have a woman who patents marketplace designs. Um, uh, Looks like a few a year. There'll be a large list of inventors. She's at the top of that list, and and they patent marketplace designs. My marketplace design isn't based on the principles of any of the marketplaces that exist, nor any of the marketplaces that are theoretically in existence. It's vastly superior to all of them, and in competition, it should eat their lunch. So it would be possible for the LME to launch, say, a corn marketplace using coordinated discovery market technology and become the new global benchmark in corn and just wipe out Chicago's primacy there, and do the same thing for wheat or rice or pot meat or lumber or pretty much anything else. Or um, the EU could launch a iron or nickel or copper market and destroy the LME's current primacy in those things. The markets based on the existing design should not be able to continue to function at their current state when in competition with a CDM. Their customers should just abandon them because all their useful customers will make more money switching to the CDM.
So from what I understand, the threat is potential disruption of worldwide established markets and therefore causing
Yep.
some quite severe economic disruption.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't describe the economic system as disruption. It would actually almost certainly kick off radical economic growth across multiple industries. But it would certainly break a lot of currently very well off people's rice bowls as the primary markets shifted from where they presently exist to where they would come to exist. Now, you know, I'm in the licensure business. I'm perfectly happy to license the technology to people like the CME Group and the LME, and they could self disrupt and lower their costs, raise their revenues, and offer their meaningful customers much better deals all at the same time. But yeah, if they don't want to do that and they don't want somebody else to just start eating their lunch for them, then suppression is a rational way to go. And that's definitely a possibility. Obviously, I'm in a completely information free environment where all of the people that I can legally talk to, um, can only tell me that they can't tell me anything.
Which must be incredibly frustrating.
Well, in particular, in July of 2023, the hearing was actually scheduled, and it was scheduled for July of 2025. So I'm in a 2-year limbo, actually, where there's virtually nothing that I can do.
And I suppose a sort of key question. You said you're in the licensing business, but I presume without this pattern, you haven't actually got a business.
Yeah. So as I said, there are agreements that can and have been made, but the degree to which you can license without a patent is extremely limited. Uh, the Copyrights and copyright licensure is possible. There is the possibility of expertise, and so you can get contracts for consulting and so on. But what a patent allows, at least for a brief period, is the ability to direct state power to restrict other people's actions. So if cars hadn't existed and you just suddenly invented the car and got the patent on it, you would be able to stop other people from driving cars and direct the government to tell them, hey, that thing that you put together in your barn and are driving around in your own backyard, not on public roads, not across, state lines or whatever, just that you have to stop it. You have to like, turn that off, disassemble it, go away. You can't use that unless Jez tells you you're allowed to, because he's the only person that's allowed to have cars. um, and so that provides an incredibly strong incentive, one, to deal with me, but two, um, uh, once you've dealt with me, your competition doesn't exist anymore, because if you have the license to operate the corn market and nobody else has the license to operate the corn market, and this system works better than the systems that exist, then you're competing with people that are from, a tech level below you. This is kind of a video game reference, but there's a lot of simulation games where you know, like Civilization, for example, you develop a civilization and you can go to war. When you're going to war with people that are 1 or 2 tech levels behind you, it's very easy to prosecute that war. You're sending tanks against knights, and it works very well for the tanks and very poorly for the knights. Um, the the market design that we use here on planet Earth probably started the Renaissance. It's about 800 years old. And this system is dependent upon mathematics that was largely developed in the 20th century. And so, you're dealing with a 700-year technology advantage if you're using CTM versus an established market design.
Which is probably why no one wants to change it.
It's working out very well for some
Mm,
people so far.
mm.
That is in decline. We're seeing decreasing amounts of economic and cultural and social stability, and I would say that that's all due to deeper issues with information overload across the board.
So this is a fascinating kind of example because essentially, from my kind of read of it and sort of summary, is that you've got this potentially huge opportunity and product, and I presume a huge, potentially a huge kind of reward, really, and business if you manage to get that patent. But without it, it's from my understanding, it's kind of an all or nothing game.
It very much at this point, that's what it feels like. Yeah. The advantages that I see is that this has sort of an avalanche character, and so, like I said, there's 4 pebbles out there. Um, I'm trying to find as many pebbles that want to start trying to roll as possible. Um, but that's the basic problem, is getting over this chicken and egg, not invented here. We've always done it this way type of mentality. Uh, and And if I had the patent, I would at the very least have this thing where, hey, look, this guy with these credentials, and this government looked at this and said, yes, you're right. you know this wheel spins faster and with less effort, or this algorithm uses 100,000 times less information and therefore can process things for vastly less electricity, vastly less money being spent to computer manufacturers, vastly less bandwidth, everything else. um, uh, people people want that social proof. you know if you say that you're great, okay, well, there are lots of people who say that they're great. If other people say that you're great, then people start paying attention to that. And so patents are a mechanism that enables inventors historically to be able to level up past that, to explain to non-inventors that they've really got the goods. And so for direct practical business reasons, for social sales reasons, for a lot of reasons, this is a potentially very useful thing, and it's gone into crazy space.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I suppose it's so much in some ways out of your control as well, and it feels from from what you've said, there is it's a sort of David and Goliath kind of situation.
Well, yes, yes. So one thing I have done in the past few months is I started a petition on change.org, which just got past its 200th signature last week. So that's nice. I think that's about five of change.org's milestones in. The next one's at 500, so we'll see. Hopefully, this one doesn't take another 5 months to get to. But so that's out there, and trying to let that let that stone try to gather some momentum as well, and push it as much as I can, because at least that's a project that I can involve myself with and push. But yeah, um, uh, it's fundamentally challenging to go out there as the small shepherd and fight a giant.
Mm. And how do you keep going? How do you keep the sort of motivation and I suppose resilience to keep fighting?
Well, for me, it's math. I'm a very bizarre person. I believe things that are mathematically proved. Most people don't seem to have that trait, as I've observed. This this replaces a system which is actively dying. We're watching, like I said, we had a bad cocoa crop in Ghana this year. Um, and as a result of that, the cocoa market is swinging around 10-ish% a week for a while. That's pretty crazy. I saw an article where a prominent commodity expert was quoted as claiming that cocoa would increase in cost by over 150%, um, in the sort of breakout of this system. Maybe he'll turn out to be right. Maybe he won't be. But at any rate, uh, chocolate is being heavily disrupted by basically a very bad season of weather in one part of the world. Does that make sense in a globalized, industrialized economy? Shouldn't we shouldn't we have seen this coming earlier? It's not like weather, an entire season of weather just suddenly happens at harvest time. Um, shouldn't we have a more congenial, or at least convergent mechanism for negotiating the consequences of this? No, it turns out we don't have those things. Um, Earlier this year, the nickel market had to be shut down because a short squeeze play was threatening to bankrupt the world's stainless steel manufacturers. maybe the world's heavily overinvested in the production of stainless steel, but um, from my engineering training, that's one of the most vital industrial products on Earth and is responsible for the lives of billions of human beings. That without that stainless steel, the sanitation and hygiene in our food supplies that don't mean that most children die of childhood illness doesn't work. Um, so, so having markets that have to be shut down so that we don't shut down the production of one of the most vital products on Earth, that's not a good thing.
No, absolutely. And obviously, it sounds like there's a lot at stake. So, one question I had was, with this failure to get a patent so far, what where does that leave you and your business? And I suppose what impact has that had on that business?
Well, for me, I'm still in the position of learning how to explain this to potential customers and developing. So going back to that sort of, entrepreneur training, I already have a product, but I'm still doing that same kind of searching and development and curiosity to find people for whom that product is a good fit. That doesn't work nearly as well as finding people with a common problem and then solving it for them after you have relationships. But it's what I can do, and so I continue that particular effort. Uh, and and as I said, there are four projects, so I can offer what help I can offer to those projects when and as they have issues that come up that I can address. And so that's what I do. Of course, that's not very remunerative, and so the rest of what I do is trying to find some way to keep the wolf from the door, so that I can keep up this activity.
Do you sort of see this journey and what's gone on, over the last few years? Do you see that as a failure?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to me, uh, it is very obvious what the consequences of this system are, uh, and that those consequences are not simply for me, but for many people. And at each turn of moving on this, I have not been able to get other people to understand what what's in it for them, what it means to do this. So the explanation I gave to you, the simple explanation I gave to you of doing this, is something that I've actually only just evolved in the last few months, and it's still not good enough. Like, it needs work, um, and so uh, that's these are failures. These are lacks on my part. I should be able to do those things better, certainly, and it just hasn't happened yet. I'm still trying to solve those problems, and those problems aren't the kinds of math problems that I'm very good at finding solutions to. And so I've been doing a poor and slow job.
Do you need is one of I suppose one of your failures may be that you're kind of doing this alone?
That's definitely an issue. I'm not purely alone. I do have a few friends I've made along the way. That mentor I'd mentioned earlier is still chipping in some comments from time to time. But uh, he, for example, feels that what I need to do is build a team to move forward, and I am behind sort of my chicken and egg wall where I'm like, what do I build a team with? Um, I don't have property value in anything right now. So I'm moving forward in this sort of loose affiliation of people whom I've either been able to personally engage, only a few of those, or been able to get over the hump of understanding that there's an opportunity there for them to move forward. Um, and that's a much tougher lift than hiring people to do things you tell them to do. Uh, but it's also not as cash expensive, which is the specific thing that I'm lacking for doing that. So you know uh, that's kind of that's the tenor of why the decisions have been made in that fashion.
A thought has occurred to me that I wonder if there's some parallels with the stories we were talking about earlier when you were mentioning those .com startups, and we were talking about how some of that was obviously early internet, and the sort of business models and the revenue models that we've got now didn't really exist then, and that meant that some of those um, business models were essentially ahead of their time because there wasn't the revenue streams to support them. And in some ways, it kind of feels like that might be the case for you and this business model. That it's a little bit, it's that maybe the timing's wrong, and you like those early businesses and the .com scene. You haven't managed to find a way of monetizing this, and so yeah. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, yeah, that absolutely might be true. This is a new idea. New ideas always have you know a bunch of different
Mm.
issues. The systems that exist have existed for a long time because they solve some problems that need to be solving. Um, the thing that I've come to, and I am I am so sort of terrified of self delusion, which is I think why I've gravitated to mathematics because numbers geometry, like logic, will slap you in the face and just like not work if you try to force it. um, is that I'm watching the current systems breaking apart. Like I'd mentioned, cocoa, nickel. There are lots of examples. In fact, more than I could possibly count. There is a flash crash a day in the world markets. They aren't large, general, publicly reported every issue types of flash crashes like the famous one or the 87 one, but or 88. I always get the date wrong with that one. But they happen. Like the markets are spontaneously wigging out now because uh, algorithmic analysis says that they can't really cope with the information load that the modern world develops. Um, Again, our existing systems are based on the notion that information all comes from humans, effectively, conscious humans that are making decisions. And that puts a governor, a limit on just how many lies and how many scams that you can possibly be exposed to. And we left that world behind decades ago. Most information is developed by machines for machines, and that's infecting everything. And so I think this is early, but I think this is one of the kinds of systems that we actually have to adopt to keep having complex and advanced economies and civilizations. And and so in that regard, um, there's a certain hope and faith that's necessary, and I think I've got it. But yeah, it's it's a challenge. It's and I have not succeeded in that challenge. I've done a bunch of different runs up at the wall, and I'm not over it yet. And I've got the contusions and scar tissue to prove the various collisions.
Do you think what you said earlier, you not being an ideal entrepreneur and not having, the drive, as you put it, do you think that's held you back in any way? And do you think that's impacted on some of the challenges you've had with this business model?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Um, I'm, I've never been particularly social. Sales is a very social
Mm,
process. Uh, Learning basic human skills at the same time that you're attempting to sell the planet on a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity is definitely not the combination you would seek out. Um, uh, uh, so yeah, yeah, it's tough for me to get myself up and out there. Uh, and so that's actually one of the primary reasons I got myself into podcasting. Um, the sort of local opportunities for me to experience talking to random human beings effectively dried up,
mm,
and I was casting around for other
mm,
potential ways to make that happen. And it occurred to me that I could probably do that in venues like
mm.
this.
Because it's kind of like, you know, if you look at some of the successful businesses out there, and they've been founded by business partnerships, and you've got essentially, and this is obviously a very simplistic viewpoint, but you've normally got a tech guy, and then you've normally got a sort of star, like a Steve Jobs. He had Wozniak to do the tech side of it, even though Steve Jobs was very actually involved in the design and the some of the technical stuff as well. But Steve Jobs was the salesperson. Essentially, he was the face, and he was the the loudspeaker, if you want to put it like that. It kind of sounds like you might need someone like that.
You're not the first person to say that to me, and I wholeheartedly, excuse me, agree. Like I said, there are a
Mm,
couple of potential salespeople out there that are trying out sales that in a loose affiliative sense. But
mm,
yeah, I don't have personal contacts with sort of
mm,
globally successful salespeople.
mm,
Anybody wants to get me a warm introduction to Elon Musk or something, um, this is worth a lot more than his companies are, and he's very good at selling trillion-dollar ideas to people, and he's
mm.
not alone.
Well, he's and very disruptive ideas as well.
Yes,
So, just wrapping up, what given how much you've been through and the sort of the road and the rocky road that you've been through, and essentially fighting a government, which obviously can't be easy, what advice would you give to listeners who have suffered challenges and setbacks within their own business?
motivation has to be personal. Uh, the your reasons for why you're doing what you're doing need to be things that are are within yourself, because if it's external, the world can and will find your price. Um, uh, when I set out to do this, I didn't expect it to be this hard. I did expect it to be quite difficult. I anticipated some of the problems I was having, but I didn't think that effectively zero human beings in the financial industry would have any capacity for technological thought, which is what I've encountered so far. Uh, I didn't think that the U.S. government was going to break its own laws in order to stick me in a corner. Um, but what I did have was a Kelly criterion calculation. So the Kelly criterion was developed, I think, in the 50s, to extract information from a noisy phone line, but it works for any form of risky information. Kelly liked betting on horses, and he used it for working out his horse race betting strategy, and then became one of the first quant traders and a highly successful one on Wall Street. And what it effectively does is tells you what portion of your resources you should dedicate to an idea based on the risks and rewards. Um, and and the Kelly criterion on this one is pretty obscene. So that's what I'm following. I found something within the Kelly criterion I actually call the Samaritan line, um, where the 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 sort of the ordinary thing effectively flips over. If the benefits are broad enough and generally beneficial enough, the Kelly criterion, which normally tells you to reserve fairly large parts of your potential, flip over and effectively tell you to go all in. And this particular idea is well past the Samaritan line.
So you need to find that star to work with you and go all in.
Absolutely, yeah.
I suppose just final question. Um, Looking back at everything that's happened to you, and going back to those sort of redundancies that you had, do you wish that none of that had actually happened, and that if you had the opportunity, you could just completely erase that all those all the challenges you've had with this pattern and the redundancies in your early career?
I think there's always a temptation to have removed any kind of roadblock, but I actually turn out to find computational mathematics absolutely fascinating, and without that exposure, I doubt that I would have done that. If I had actually studied nuclear engineering in school, which, as it happens, has no meaningful career opportunities, but if that had worked out, if a career opportunity had sort of fallen into my lap there instead of where it actually did fall into my lap, I I'd probably be a nuclear engineer today, and I'd be watching the world shaking itself apart with almost no ability to have any idea what was going on or affect things in a positive way. Whereas now I'm seeing that and have a very real potential to I've got the seeds, and I just need to work with some people to get them planted, to repair things. And so while my material circumstances would almost certainly be radically better, um, uh, I feel amazed and blessed to be working on something that's actually consequential and at least you know was challenging and interesting. I mean, I solved the problem now, so now I'm looking for sort of
Hmm.
the next intriguing, you know, thing to to think through and master. But yeah, I don't know how I get here without the path, and I'm pretty happy here. Although, as I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty happy everywhere. So maybe who knows?
Good place um, to be, and good place to end it. We do always end on a quick fire round, so this is short questions and short answers. Question one: failure is.
Inevitable.
What's your life's mission?
Currently, upgrading economics.
Nice. What's one piece of advice you'd want to give to other people on your deathbed?
Principles are everything.
If you could be immortal and live forever, would you take it?
Sure.
Any reason why?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm a fundamentally contented person, so most of the generally negative things probably wouldn't hit me personality wise, and my central fascination with mathematics, and now the mathematics of computation, is not a pursuit I expect to be exhausted uh, in infinite amounts of time. So I don't have any downsides. In fact, one of there's a fantasy series, and this is a quick fire. This is probably not right, but there's several fantasy games, some of which have rules, some of which don't. One that's fascinated me for decades is a game that was invented by Tad Williams called Shent, and we know quite literally nothing about how it's played, but it's played by an immortal being of basically his version of elves. Um, and Shent is a game that's so fun to play. You play it, not to win or lose, to explore
Mm.
new kinds of strategic engagement within the game. And and as soon as I read about it, it captured my imagination. The notion of an
Mm.
activity that's so sweet that just in engaging it is something to captivate an immortal. So sure, yeah, I'll take immortality if it's on offer.
It's a good life lesson there. Name one habit that keeps you resilient.
Uh, Sleeping, I think. I I just kind of generally try to see to my physical needs when and as they come up. Um, so like you don't push yourself past you're tired, you go to sleep, and you wake up, and
Mm.
problem's still there, but you're in better shape now.
Mm. Listen to your body, yeah. If you could swap places with another business person in the world, who would it be?
Well, in the same way that I don't really mind immortality, I do kind of mind swapping. Uh, there are there are people who could directly and immediately implement CDM, and so maybe them. So like the chairman of the CME group, or the LME, or the New York Stock Exchange, or the Intercontinental Exchange, or I mean those would be sort of superficial answers, but I, I don't want their lives. I want mine.
And whose guest do you think I should have on? I can recommend.
Well, Elon Musk, he's got to have some interesting failure stories. Uh,
Obviously, Elon, if you're listening, I would love to have you on. So big, shout out for
there
that.
you go. Any of those guys up at the top of that. Jack
Mm.
Dorsey, he's got to have some pretty crazy failure stories as well.
Yeah, well, yeah. Same shout out, Jack, if you're listening. Do get in touch. So Noah, where can people find you and connect with you?
So the easiest way to get in contact with me is my email address, just noahphealy@yahoo.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Noah Healey there. I co-host a podcast called The Fourth Age, the AI Revolution, with the ex-CTO of Reddit, Marty Wiener, where we talk about AI and its impacts on society. Um, so those are all good to go. And as I said, I've got the petition up on change.org under CDM_patent. Anybody that would like to reach out or show a little support, just drop a signature, and that would be unbelievably useful.
Great. Well, I put all that in the show notes. So Noah, thanks so much for your time and sharing all your fascinating stories and your journey. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Fail. Really hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Please do subscribe to the show and leave us a review. It really does help us to grow and to reach more people. Do follow us on social media too. We're at Jeswood on Instagram and at Beyond the Fail on YouTube and also on Linktree. Thanks again and see you soon.